Star Wars, one of the deepest, if not the deepest, fictional universe ever in terms of the sheer amount of content, crafted by hundreds of writers and creators who've expanded on the immortal legacy of George Lucas's legendary films and those of his successors. Star Wars has been around for so long and been beloved by so many creators and fans that some corners of the fictional universe, from obscure starships, backwater worlds, and especially captivating background characters, have been fleshed out with tie-in material more than most would ever think possible. This phenomenon is known as the Glup Shitto, when an element, specifically a minor character, in a Star Wars film or show becomes beloved by the fan base, so much so that they usually end up getting featured in books, games, comics, short stories, RPG guidebooks, toys, and more, despite the general public seeing them as just one little freak in a pulpy space opera filled to the brim with them. You're probably familiar with this idea if you've been in touch with Star Wars or the fan base for some time, or if you already watched my first Iceberg video talking about dozens of strange and obscure Star Wars characters that have been labeled Glup Shitto. If you haven't seen that one already, don't worry. This is Star Wars, so no matter which way you watch it, you're watching it out of order somehow. If there's an obscure Star Wars character you'd kill the Emperor for that isn't featured in this video or the last one, go ahead and leak those data tapes in the comments, as pre-production on episode 3 has already begun. But I might be getting a little ahead of myself. With an especially exciting May the 4th season coming to a close and the Acolyte just around the corner, there's hardly been a better time to immortalize some more Glup Shittos in the Jedi archives. Whether you're a Padawan new to the franchise, or an ancient master itching to brush up on your lore, or you just need a nice background video while playing your favorite Star Wars game, then this is the video you're looking for. So grab some Mantel mix, bypass your compressors, and switch on your hyperdrives to dive right into episode 2 of the weird Star Wars characters Iceberg.
Why, you stuck-up, half-witted, scruffy-looking nerf herder!
Biggs Darklighter. Biggs Darklighter is a character from the very first Star Wars film, the stupendously mustached Rebel Alliance pilot and childhood friend of Luke Skywalker, played by actor Garrick Hagan. He appears near the end of the film at the Rebel base on Yavin 4, flying during the Battle of Yavin under the callsign Red 3. Darklighter participated in the third trench run on the Death Star before being tragically shot down and killed by Darth Vader, motivating Luke to finish the mission alone. Biggs only has a minor role in the final film, but originally had several more scenes, including an infamous deleted scene from the beginning of the film where he talks with Luke on Tatooine before leaving to join the rebellion. Even the scene where he reunites with Luke at the Rebel base wasn't included in the final film until the special edition, originally leaving fans confused at the weight placed on his death in the original cut. However, his deleted scenes would see representation in the film's 1976 novelization, as well as the film's original Marvel comic and radio adaptations. His backstory, namely his defection from the Empire after inspiring a mutiny aboard the Star Destroyer Rand Ecliptic, has been featured in comic stories in the old EU or Legends continuity. This story was at one point going to be explored in the Star Wars Rebels show, but Biggs was replaced with Wedge to avoid potential continuity issues. Characters with the name Biggs featured in some of the earliest script drafts for the original Star Wars, at various points being the son of King Chaos, brother of the princess character that would end up becoming Leia, Luke's younger brother, or the brother of another character named Wendy Marstrap. More on him later. Because of his close connection to the story of Luke, his noble sacrifice at the Battle of Yavin, and the notoriety of his deleted scenes, Biggs has left a huge and enduring impression on the fanbase as a whole. Although, let's be real, if a character so much as Breeze in the original trilogy, you can bet your bottom credit that they've got 12 action figures, a comic miniseries, and a dedicated cult to them at this point. Biggs is a prime example of a Glup Shitto because casual viewers see him as a completely forgettable character, but most Star Wars fans know exactly who he is and why he's so important. Though he's also separate from some of these early Glup Shittos because he had a name and some established lore basically right from the get-go. Biggs is also notable for being the favorite Star Wars character of Alex Damon, who runs the Fantastic Star Wars Explained YouTube channel. Jek Porkins. Jek Tono Porkins is another Rebel pilot who tragically dies during the attack on the Death Star in Episode 4. Considering the character's surname, physical appearance, and canonical nickname of Piggy, it's not surprising that Porkins has wormed his way into the hearts of fans of the original film, as well as becoming the butt of many jokes, both in and out of universe. Despite this, many characters deeply respected him for his heroics during and before Yavin in both continuities. The Resistance had a basic training maneuver named the Porkins Belly Run, and in the X-Wing novels, there's a Gamorrean pilot named Vort Sabinring who took the nickname Piggy as a badge of honor, partially in remembrance to Porkins. Porkins was played by actor William Hootkins, who was originally considered for the film as a stand-in for Jabba the Hutt. Though he declined that role, he would eventually go on to play the rebel pilot character, and because of the name, initially wondered if his role would involve makeup to make him appear as a pig-like alien. Despite his small role in the film and his character's death, Hootkins was happy with his role in the film, saying in an interview for Star Wars Insider 32, "A lot of actors dream of being involved in a film at the end of their career that inspires people and makes a lot of people happy. I got to start my career with a film like that." For some time, Porkins actually had two first names. He was given the first name Jek in the 1989 RPG sourcebook Galaxy Guide 1 A New Hope, and then Marvel's Star Wars issue 6 gave him the name Tono. Star Wars reference and RPG author Abel G. Pena consolidated the two names in 2002 for an article in Star Wars Gamer issue 9, confirming Tono was Porkins' middle name. We'll see Pena pop up in a lot of other entries as he's a huge fan of resolving continuity issues such as this. One interesting element that Porkins helped introduce to Star Wars is the idea of ejecting from a starfighter into space, as Biggs tells him to do right before he dies.
Eject! I can hold it! Pull on! No, I'm alright!
Though the idea of ejecting into space doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense, probably being an artifact from Star Wars World War II inspirations, comics and books would later elaborate that a starship's ejector seats and the pilot's flight suits contained shielding and life support necessary to allow a pilot to get to safety in an emergency. Gonk Droid. The GNK series power droid, also colloquially known as the Gonk droid, is a variant of droid that is ubiquitous throughout the galaxy. Bulky and slow-moving, the primary purpose of Gonk droids was to be essentially walking batteries, but some have also been repurposed as ammunition dispensing droids, or even, on rare occasions, as suicide bombers. Gonk droids can also apparently feel pain, as we can see in Return of the Jedi. The low honking noises that they make is referred to as the Gonkian language, and these sounds were the inspiration for their name out of universe. They are not to be confused with the extremely similar EG series power droid, which is actually what most people tend to think of when referring to the Gonk droid. That's right, this isn't technically a GNK series power droid, although they make the exact same Gonk sounds and serve essentially the same purpose, so really, what's the difference? Originally depicted by dwarf actors in suits in the very first Star Wars film, Gonk droids have appeared in countless pieces of Star Wars media since, including the Battlefront games, the Bad Batch, and the LEGO Star Wars games. The LEGO games are especially fond of the Gonk droid. LEGO Star Wars The Complete Saga features a mostly useless version of the character that can't jump or attack, but when you equip the Super Gonk Red Brick extra, you can run really fast and jump really high. LEGO Star Wars The Skywalker Saga also features a string of escort missions for the Gonk droids Gonky, Gonko, Gonker, Gonk Star, Mama Gonk, and Gonkobo, at the end of which you unlock the playable Gonk droid and the GNK Power Cruiser, a Gonk-shaped starship. There are also a string of side quests given by the supposedly evil Gonk named Gonkatine, who wants to form the Knights of Gonk, consisting of Invisigonk, Mad Dog Gonkdo, and Giga Gonk. Skywalker Saga also features a holiday variant of the droid, as well as its own Super Gonk feature, which spawns in an invincible, super fast Golden Gonk droid that the player can mount. Bib Fortuna. Bib Fortuna was a pale-skinned Twi'lek that served as the major domo of the crime lord Jabba the Hutt. Fortuna first appeared in Return of the Jedi as the one to greet C-3PO and R2-D2 at the gate to Jabba's palace, saying his iconic line,
"They wanna wonga."
My.
which is a simple greeting in Huttese that roughly translates to, "What is your business here?" According to Legends material, Fortuna was exiled from the Twi'lek homeworld of Ryloth at a young age for selling an illicit substance called Rill, and returned there in the service of Jabba to capture slaves. In fact, he helped capture both the Rancor and Salacious B. Crumb, who both reside in Jabba's palace. He appears as early in the timeline as the Phantom Menace, where he wakes up Jabba from a nap and served Jabba through the Clone Wars all the way up until the Hutt's death. Though Fortuna escaped the destruction of the sail barge, he had mixed fortunes afterwards. In the canon continuity, he would take over Jabba's criminal enterprise for a few years before being killed by Boba Fett. However, in Legends, his brain would be taken by the Omar monks to be placed in one of their spider droid walker things. Eventually, though, his brain would be placed back into the body of another Twi'lek named Olin, from which he would rebuild Jabba's criminal empire. Bib Fortuna was voiced in Episode 6 by Eric Bowersfield, who also voiced Admiral Akbar, but was uncredited for either of these roles in the film. Fortuna was played physically by Michael Carter, who said during an interview at Star Wars Celebration 2016,
Bib Fortuna is very famous.
Yes.
I'm hardly known within my own family.
Jabba's dancers. Though adult elements like drug use, graphic violence, and sex appeal are usually pretty absent from the Star Wars universe, that doesn't stop such elements from occasionally popping up in Star Wars-ified pulp fantasy ways. One of the most well-known and generally beloved examples of the latter is the presence of exotic dancers in Jabba's palace in Return of the Jedi. Jabba's palace features a vast roster of weird and unique aliens that surpasses even the Mos Eisley Cantina sequence in terms of inventive body shapes and appearances, but that sure didn't stop the film's artists from putting together some scantily clad alien women in makeup to satisfy the human audience. Perhaps the most famous of Jabba's dancers is Ula, the green-skinned Twi'lek who gets eaten alive by the Rancor after she refuses Jabba's advances towards her. Which, that has to be one of the darkest ways to go out in Star Wars, even more so than burning alive or getting the Force dyad life juice sucked out of you. As detailed in the short story A Time to Mourn, A Time to Dance from the Tales from Jabba's Palace short story collection, Ula was originally from Ryloth, where her father was the chief of their local clan. Devoting herself to dancing, as education was restricted for women on Ryloth, she was lured by Bib Fortuna off-world with promises of luxury and a handsome and charming boss named Jabba. She came to Tatooine, however, enslaved and forced to dance at the end of a chain in a tiny costume. And, well, we basically know the rest. The next most famous dancers in Jabba's entourage included an iconic trio of aliens who performed for the Max Rebo Band, and I actually didn't know this until doing the research for this video, weren't introduced until Episode 6's Special Edition for the Jedi Rocks musical number and weren't present in the original film. This trio includes Lin May, a blue-skinned Twi'lek who was saved from slavery by Boba Fett and learned the art of dancing in hopes that she could reunite with him and woo him with her skills. Ristal Sant was a half-human, half-Thelan dancer who was raised by Ortolans and was briefly enslaved before she was freed in a sabacc game by none other than Lando Calrissian. Griata Jendawanian, a Rhodian singer, rejected the violent hunting culture of her homeworld Rhodia to become a dancer with Sai Snoodles, eventually joining Lin and Ristal to dance for the Max Rebo Band. All three of these dancers would survive the destruction of Jabba's sail barge, with Ristal and Griata forming a new band called the Palpatones that would come to rival the Max Rebo Band. Lin May, however, would swear vengeance on Luke Skywalker and his rebel allies after the supposed death of Boba Fett at the Great Pit of Carkoon, but would give up her vendetta when Fett resurfaced alive and well years later. Honestly, now that I know this, the fact that she didn't show up in the Book of Boba Fett to pursue her crush is a crime. The final dancer featured in Return of the Jedi is Yarna Da'al Gargan, the debut member of the Eskagian species. The character was originally envisioned by director Richard Marquand as a daughter to Jabba the Hutt. Perhaps the most recognizable detail about this character are her 6 breasts, which was a detail apparently conceived by the costume department in an alcohol-influenced state. Patissa. Patissa was the name given to Jabba the Hutt's Rancor, the giant brown monster that Luke Skywalker fights underneath Jabba's palace in Return of the Jedi. Patissa meant friend, sweetie, or darling in Huttese, and is likely reflective of how much Jabba loved and cared for the creature. Aww. Most fans will likely only know this Rancor as the Rancor, as that's all it was referred to as in the films, but was given the name Patissa in Chuck Wendig's 2016 canon novel, Aftermath Life Debt. Jabba's Rancor was the first individual depicted of the species being portrayed with a rod puppet for Return of the Jedi, and was described by its creators as a cross between a bear and a potato. Though it was originally going to be played by an actor in a suit, as George Lucas wanted the Rancor to be the best Godzilla-like movie monster to have ever been created, according to effects supervisor Phil Tippett. Rancors would go on to become some of the most iconic Star Wars creatures ever, with one having a starring role in the Book of Boba Fett, and others featuring in some particularly difficult boss battles in Star Wars Jedi Survivor. I don't want to talk about the literal days I wasted last summer trying to beat the double Rancor fight on Master difficulty. One Rancor appears in an episode of The Bad Batch titled Rampage, where Clone Force 99 has to rescue a baby Rancor named Moochie for Bib Fortuna. After this episode's release, many speculated that Moochie and Jabba's Rancor in Episode 6 were one and the same, and LEGO Star Wars The Skywalker Saga seemed to address this by naming Jabba's Rancor Patissa Moochie in a character description. However, Patissa is known to be male, and Moochie in the episode is stated to be female, so unless Rancors can switch sexes throughout their lives like some real-world animals such as clownfish, it appears that Jabba probably had multiple Rancors throughout his tenure on Tatooine. Malakili. I'm sure that everybody watching this video remembers the big guy in Return of the Jedi that cries when Luke Skywalker kills Batista the Rancor. This character's name is Malakili, and as we can infer from the film, served as the Beastmaster of Jabba the Hutt at his palace. Having grown up on the rough and tumble worlds of Corellia and Nar Shaddaa, Malakili had a difficult upbringing, having been purchased by Jabba the Hutt from slavers who previously employed him for the Circus Horrificus. Malakili always had a close affinity for animals, but bonded particularly close with Batista and even dreamed of escaping Jabba's palace with the Rancor one day. As he contemplated suicide wandering the Tatooine desert in the months following the deaths of Batista and Jabba, he would be attacked by the Red Key Raiders, but was saved by none other than Cobb Vanth, who helped him get back on his feet. And Malakili would eventually open the Crystal Moon restaurant with Porcellus, Jabba's former head shelf, and help raise a baby Hutt named Borgo. All of this was detailed in Chuck Wendig's Aftermath trilogy. Malakili was played by actor Paul Brook in episode 6, and his sobs heard in the film were recorded by Ernie Foselius, but neither actors were credited for their roles in the film. George Lucas's concept for the character came from the idea of a person with a soft spot for even the galaxy's worst monsters, and was recorded saying in the book Making Return of the Jedi, "I like the idea that everyone loves someone, and even the worst, most horrible monster you can imagine was loved by his keeper, and the Rancor probably loved his keeper." Naturally, Malakili's unique role in the saga as a sensitive soul amongst a horde of bloodthirsty criminals has made him an especially loved character in the fandom and even earned favor among critics. Roger Ebert said in his review for Return of the Jedi that details like Malakili were what made Star Wars films more than just space operas. Jubnuk. The Gamorrean guards are some of the more iconic aliens to come out of Jabba the Hutt's palace sequence in Return of the Jedi, though from getting force-choked by Luke Skywalker or thrown off of a cliff in the Book of Boba Fett, they're far from the luckiest. Jubnuk in particular was an individual Gamorrean who is really only memorable for having been eaten by the Rancor after falling into the creature's pit with Luke Skywalker. Despite having been bitten into and fully consumed by the Rancor as its last meal, being heard squealing in terror before being cut off by a sickening crunch in the film, depending on your sources, this character actually might have survived. According to the 1996 Jabba's Palace pop-up book, while Jabba was dealing with Luke Skywalker, he had tasked Jubnuk with finding his lucky Tusken battle talisman. After Jubnuk searches the entire palace up and down with no luck, he returns to Jabba's courtroom just as Jabba presses the button to open the Rancor pit's trapdoor, after which the events of the film resume and Jubnuk is eaten. Later, however, Malakili hears sounds from the Rancor's belly and cuts it open to find Jubnuk alive and well, thanks to his Gamorrean armor and the talisman, which he had finally found while in the Rancor's stomach. He decides to keep the talisman until he sees his master again, which good luck with that, buddy. Although this pop-up book was co-written by veteran Star Wars author Kevin J. Anderson, the continuity of its events was up for debate for a while. Leland Chee, Lucasfilm's continuity database supervisor, had never known about the book and Jubnuk's fate until a Wikipedia editor had told him about it. According to Wikipedia, though Chee on Twitter was initially suspect of the book and preferred to ignore it, he later admitted that considering Boba Fett's survival after having been similarly eaten and presumed dead, it's possible that perhaps Jubnuk did survive as well. Or maybe Star Wars really does just have a Rancor-sized problem with allowing characters to finally die for good. EV-99. EV-99 was an EV series supervisor droid known for operating as chief of cyborg operations at Jabba's palace. Due to degradation in her programming, she tortured other droids for her own amusement, as seen in her debut appearance in Return of the Jedi. Beyond the halls of Jabba's palace, her fearsome reputation as a droid torturer would earn her the nicknames Queen of Durasteel and Mistress of Mayhem. She also appeared in the 2023 Dark Droids crossover series of Marvel Star Wars comics, where she helped infect Lobot with the Scourge droid virus. Having been deactivated after the death of Jabba, she would later find new and independent purpose as a bartender droid at Chalmun's Cantina, as seen in The Mandalorian, reversing the Cantina's no-droid tradition and managing to keep her more violent tendencies at bay. EV-99 was originally conceived from Ralph McQuarrie's sketches of an assassin droid character, which would eventually become IG-88. The droid was accomplished with a practical marionette in Episode 6, and the marionette has been on display for the Star Wars Identities exhibition. The droid was voiced by Return of the Jedi's director Richard Marquand, mod on set, but was redubbed for the film's final cut. For her appearance in the Mandalorian episode The Gunslinger, the droid was voiced by none other than Mark Hamill. A similar EV series droid voiced by Sam Witwer can be seen in the Book of Boba Fett working as a sous chef, but this droid is considered to be a separate character. Lobot. Lobot first appeared in The Empire Strikes Back as Lando Calrissian's silent aide who wears a cybernetic brain implant. In both Legends and canon continuities, he was the steadfast friend of Lando long before the events of the movies, saving his life multiple times and helping administrate Cloud City with the help of his implant, which allowed him to talk directly with the city's main computer system. Continuities disagree on the reason Lobot got his implant in the first place. In Legends, it was because he was originally a criminal on Cloud City who received the implant as part of a crime sentencing, but in canon, he willingly had the implant installed by the Empire to efficiently run battle calculations for them. In Legends, Lobot would continue to serve Lando in the New Republic for many years, even becoming the Baron Administrator of Cloud City in Lando's place. Canon material has emphasized the toll that Lobot's implant has taken on his mental state, showing the tragic process of Lobot's personality becoming taken over by the machine. Expanded universe materials such as comics in both Legends and canon emphasize Lobot's friendship with Lando, characterizing Lobot not as a slave or servant, but a loyal lifelong friend whose seriousness complemented Calrissian's flamboyance. Lobot's only film appearance was his debut role in Episode 5, even though there was a death scene of Lobot removed from the film specifically to potentially allow Lando to have appeared in Episode 6. He was played by actor John Hollis, who discussed in an interview for Star Wars Insider 33 that the cybernetic implant prop was very heavy on his head and he was happy to take it off at the end of a shoot, and he also joked that if you've got a part where you're walking around with flashing lights on your head, you can't really fail, can you? His name, as many have speculated, comes from the word lobotomy, as it was originally intended for Lobot to have been lobotomized in the process of installing his implant, rendering him mute. Despite this, Lobot's voice can be heard in the radio adaptation of Episode 5, as well as his appearance in the Force Unleashed game, and he also speaks in the books and comics. Like most Glup Shittos of the original trilogy, Lobot has received plenty of attention throughout the years, with much speculation surrounding the nature of his implant and his relationship with Lando, as well as, of course, receiving plenty of action figures, as well as cameos and spoofs such as Robot Chicken. Forlom and Zuckuss. Forlom and Zuckuss are two bounty hunter characters that debuted in The Empire Strikes Back during the famous bounty hunter lineup sequence on the Executor. Though all of the bounty hunters introduced in this super iconic scene could be considered Glup Shittos in their own right, Forlom and Zuckuss are definitely two of the strangest. Forlom, who is the droid, is described as having overwritten his own programming in order to forge his own destiny as a bounty hunter. His model, the LeMMiNo series droid line, was specifically constructed to look like certain insectoid species such as the Gand, of which Zuckuss was a member. Zuckuss had a unique ability to find hidden bounties and targets, which he attributed to latent force sensitivity. Though Forlom and Zuckuss became partners early in their careers, they would eventually go their separate ways, according to stories in the Star Wars Gamer magazine. Zuckuss was a bit of a rebel sympathizer and worked with the New Republic more exclusively later in his career, before becoming imprisoned in a New Republic psychiatric facility. However, Forlom started working more closely for the Empire, with his unusual kindness, for a droid, replaced with cruelty and lust for profit after taking severe damage in a fight with Boba Fett. Like many original trilogy Glup Shittos, Forlom and Zuckuss first got confirmed names from their Kenner action figures, although on the original figures, their names were actually swapped, which caused quite a bit of confusion for several years. Though this would be corrected later in reference books, this mistake was kept for Kenner's 30th anniversary figures in honor of the original mistake. Both Forlom and Zuckuss are strange and fascinating characters in their own right, both sporting memorable designs and eccentric personalities, but Zuckuss might have Forlom beat when it comes to weird Star Wars trivia. Beyond the Kenner name swap, Zuckuss was originally named Tuckus in the draft for Episode 5, and thanks to a typo in Marvel Star Wars issue 50, was named Zuckass, which is made even funnier considering the name was used to refer to Dengar and not Zuckuss. In the Legends continuity, Zuckuss was canonically diagnosed with schizophrenia and multiple personality disorder, which was supposedly a retcon used to explain major differences in his speech patterns and personality when comparing the Bounty Hunter Wars trilogy of novels to other pieces of media. IG-88. Another super iconic bounty hunter from The Empire Strikes Back, IG-88 was an assassin droid manufactured by Halawan Laboratories, who had a programmed desire to kill organic beings, making him well suited to the bounty hunter profession. IG-88 was designed by Bill Hargreaves and Steve Short as a departure from any of Ralph McQuarrie's concept art for the bounty droid character. though McQuarrie's original concepts would be repurposed for other droid characters such as EV-99 and the IGRM droids in Star Wars Rebels. The original prop for IG-88 was actually over 7 feet tall, and if you look closely, is actually standing on a lower platform than the rest of the bounty hunters in the lineup just so that it could fit in the shot. Fairly well known among fans is that the prop for IG-88's head was also used in A New Hope as part of Wooher's drink setup in the cantina, and was actually originally a combustion chamber for a Rolls-Royce jet engine. This head prop as part of a drink bar would be referenced in episodes of The Mandalorian, which of course features another IG series droid of its own. Going back to in-universe lore, according to Kevin J. Anderson's Legends short story, Therefore I Am, The Tale of IG-88, IG-88 was actually one of 5 IG series droids linked together by a hive mind, with the individual we see in episode 5 being IG-88B. Although B is by far the most famous, IG-88A was actually their leader, a nearly sentient droid whose sole mission was to eradicate all organic beings. Infecting other droids with their sentience programming, the IGs would house their revolution efforts on the factory world of Mechas 3, and the other IGs would go out into the galaxy to draw attention away from their leader. All of the other IGs, however, would end up destroyed, including 88B, who was destroyed by Boba Fett on Bespin and can be seen dismantled in the background of the Ugnaughts furnace room in the film. Before that, though, 88B managed to hack some of Darth Vader's files that revealed information on the second Death Star, which would allow 88A to eventually, get this, infiltrate the main computer aboard the second Death Star and gain complete control over it. During the Battle of Endor, 88A would even slightly adjust the super laser blasts for the laser's operators so that they could accurately hit the rebel targets. Before 88A could send out a signal to his droid allies to rebel against their masters and leave with the Death Star, the Rebel Alliance would destroy the station as we see in Return of the Jedi, destroying the consciousness of the last IG droid. This isn't where IG-88's story fully ends, however. 88A's body would eventually be reclaimed and reprogrammed, reduced to a mere drone and bodyguard to a merchant named Tycho Thul, but would eventually be finally destroyed by the New Republic while defending a station that housed a virus known as the Emperor's Plague, as seen in the Young Jedi Knight series. In the current canon, IG-88, presumably in his B body, would be rebuilt and continue to serve various employers, at different points being hired to kill Darth Vader or serve Crimson Dawn. He even survived up until the era of the First Order, discussing the location of the Millennium Falcon with fellow bounty hunter Bazine Netal. Tito. Tito is the name of a humanoid creature that Rey encounters near the beginning of The Force Awakens, where she stops him from capturing BB-8 in a net. Tito is also the name of the character's species, which shared a telepathic hive mind and made no distinction between individuals. The language spoken by Titos was simply called Tito Speak. Tito was voiced in the film by David Ackerd, a veteran Star Wars sound editor and voice actor, and portrayed physically by Kieran Shaw, who holds a Guinness World Record for the shortest professional stuntman currently working in film. Kieran has played many other diminutive Star Wars characters such as Bretup the Ewok in Return of the Jedi, Nambi Gima from The Rise of Skywalker, and Granik from Andor. Other than some adaptations of The Force Awakens and a few episodes of Forces of Destiny, Tito has made scant few appearances in other Star Wars media. Dexter Jetster. Dexter Jetster, known to his friends as Dex, was a Besalisk who owned a restaurant named Dexter's Diner in the Cocoa Town district of Coruscant. Though most will recognize him from his appearance in Attack of the Clones, where he helps his friend Obi-Wan Kenobi by telling him about the cloners on Kamino, Dex's combined legends and canon history actually goes back hundreds of years and contains all kinds of crazy adventures. Dex is a member of the adventure-loving Besalisk species from the frozen ocean world of Ojam, having been at various points a professional fighter, an arms dealer, and a prospector. 250 years before the Phantom Menace, during the High Republic era, Dex was a part of Maz Kanata's pirate crew, where he participated in the Battle of Jeddah and fought against a rival criminal gang, the Dank Grax. He would encounter a young Obi-Wan Kenobi multiple times during Kenobi's apprenticeship and help him out on various missions, before following the Jedi to Coruscant to open Dex's Donuts with the last of his money. When Dex's donut stand was destroyed by an air taxi, he used the settlement money to open his now famous Dexter's Diner. After the rise of the Empire, Dex would erase all records of his existence and help Jedi and slaves evade the New Order. He would struggle to support his diner and eventually abandon it, but the tunnel behind the diner that he used in his smuggling operations would be a key part of rebel activity in the area for years to come. After the defeat of the Empire, he would feel tremendous guilt that by helping Obi-Wan find Kamino, he ended up playing a part in the Empire's rise to power and felt complicit in the deaths of not only his Jedi friend, but billions of others. Dexter's voice was provided by Ronald Falk for Attack of the Clones, and he was named after George Lucas's son, Jet George Lucas. Dexter's Diner is one of the most iconic locations in Star Wars, as it was used as the hub world for the very first LEGO Star Wars game. Gardulla the Hutt. Gardulla, whose full title was Gardulla Besadi the Elder, was a Hutt who held considerable power alongside Jabba on Tatooine. As mentioned in The Phantom Menace, she was the original slave owner of Shmi and Anakin Skywalker until she lost them betting on pod races with Watto. Though she was considered one of Jabba's biggest rivals, her gambling habit was so severe that she would eventually go back to Nal Hutta to serve as Jabba's representative, but her downfall was also partially orchestrated by Darth Plagueis when the secret Sith began to favor Jabba in his business dealings. As shown in the video game Bounty Hunter, Gardulla would become involved with a terrorist cult called the Bando Gora, which would make her a target of Palpatine and Count Dooku, who sent Jango Fett to deal with her, as that line of people really love to be convoluted in their chain of command. Jango accomplished his goal by pushing Gardulla into the mouth of her own pet Krayt Dragon. She would actually survive this though, as Jango would kill the Krayt Dragon before it could fully digest her, I guess, where afterwards she would go on to serve Jabba. I personally wanted to include Gardulla the Hutt in this video because I have really fond memories of arguing with an old middle school friend who owned an action figure of Gardulla because I thought Gardulla was Jabba the Hutt's mom. So, hey, if you're out there somewhere watching this video, you were right all along. Gardulla the Hutt is not actually Jabba's mom. Quarsh Panaka. Captain Quarsh Panaka was the head of Naboo's royal security forces during the time of the planet's invasion in 32 BBY. Most notably, he helped protect Queen Amidala and fought alongside her during their battle to retake the Theed Palace, though he overall clashed with her other protectors, the Jedi. Panaka was a staunch militarist and a conservative who was raised with feelings of animosity against the Gungans and believed that Naboo should have a standing army, a sentiment that was uncommon among his peaceful people but only grew after the Trade Federation's invasion. Panaka's principles would make him a staunch supporter of Chancellor Palpatine as he continued to gain power, and he became a Moff after the establishment of the Empire, firmly believing in the new regime's methods and capability of maintaining order. However, he largely stuck to his principles and he disapproved of those who worked in the Empire for their personal gain. Panaka's ultimate fate differs depending on continuity. In the current canon, he eventually met Princess Leia in 3 BBY and began to suspect that she was the secret daughter of Padme, but he would be killed by Saw Gerrera's partisans before he had the chance to tell anybody. In Legends, Panaka has no confirmed death, and he served the Empire until its ultimate defeat, becoming replaced by a Gungan senator in the New Republic. Quarsh Panaka was played by Ghanaian British actor Hugh Quarshie in The Phantom Menace, whose approach to the character was to seem as tough as possible so that the Jedi looked even tougher by comparison. His name was never meant to be spoken in the film itself, but Quarshie found a place to ad-lib it during the scene where he was responding to a comlink. The character's first name, Quarsh, is an obvious reference to the actor's last name, and it was introduced in the online supplemental Author's Cut articles for the Essential Guide to Warfare. Panaka's name was changed to Panasi for Brazilian Portuguese translations, as the name is too similar to the word Panaka with a C, which apparently means dweeb. Padme's Handmaidens. The Naboo royal handmaidens were a group of young women who served as aides, decoys, and bodyguards to the Queen of Naboo, as seen in The Phantom Menace. To outsiders, it may seem that the handmaidens assisted the Queen only with everyday tasks such as hair and makeup, but they were trained in self-defense and all carried small blaster pistols concealed in their robes. They were also selected based on their physical resemblance to the Queen, being used as body doubles when the situation called for it, with some even putting their lives at risk to protect their queen, as seen with the tragic death of Dorme in Attack of the Clones. The tradition of using multiple royal handmaidens as bodyguards and doubles was actually quite an old one, dating back to the ancient Naboo-Gungan conflicts, but was revived by Queen Padme Amidala upon her election and proved to be quite useful in her escape from the Trade Federation blockade. Padme's handmaidens all adopted names to sound similar to her own, such as Sabe, Rabe, Ierte, Corde, Dorme, etc., to better frustrate any efforts that might harm the queen. Handmaidens would continue to serve similar roles for Padme even after she stopped being queen and became senator, even splitting her entourage into governmental and residence handmaidens to better keep her marriage to Anakin Skywalker a secret. One might think that the handmaiden characters might fall out of relevance after stories set in the prequel trilogy, and for Legends you'd be right, but in the current canon they were in use as late as 4 ABY, where they helped Princess Leia protect Naboo during Operation Cinder. In one interesting turn of events, which, spoilers for the 2020 run of the Darth Vader Marvel comics, Padme's original handmaidens would found a resistance group called the Amidalans, pledging to discover whoever was responsible for Padme's mysterious death, eventually coming to the conclusion that Darth Vader had something to do with it, which, if that's not grounds for an absolutely crazy Star Wars story, then I don't know what is. C.O. Bibble. C.O. Bibble served as the governor of Naboo and head of the planet's Royal Advisory Council during the time of its invasion in 32 BBY. He can be seen in The Phantom Menace talking with and advising the Queen, where he has quite a few iconic and memeable lines.
A communications disruption can mean only one thing: invasion.
Your negotiations seem to have failed, Ambassador.
The death toll is catastrophic. We must bow to their wishes. You must contact me.
Bibble originally had served Amidala's predecessor, King Varuna, and was originally highly critical of Amidala, but eventually became one of her biggest supporters, becoming instrumental in preparing her for rule. Bibble would end up stuck on Naboo during its invasion by the Trade Federation, leading a hunger strike against the Nemoidian invaders. After the end of the invasion, Bibble would continue to serve Naboo under its future queens Jamilia and Niutni, but chose to retire as governor around the time of the formation of the Empire, after which the Empire replaced the position of governor with Moff, with Korsh Panaka fulfilling that role. Though he seems to be pretty pessimistic and kind of feeble and goofy in the film, being manipulated into recording a trap message for the Trade Federation, in universe he was regarded as brave, respected, and influential within Naboo politics. Oliver Ford Davies, the actor who portrayed Bibble, described him as having spent most of his time giving good advice that nobody took any notice of. Also, side note, I hope at some point this awesome concept art for C.O. Bibble gets used at some point for something super cool design here. Another fun fact, Davies wasn't available for shooting during episode 2's principal photography, so his appearance in episode 2 was actually filmed 9 months later and inserted digitally, an example of the prequel's insane attention to detail and continuity. Rick Ollier. Rick Ollier was a pilot from Naboo who attended Queen Padme Amidala as her personal pilot during her escape from the Trade Federation blockade in The Phantom Menace. His role in the film isn't huge, but he sticks out in the minds of many fans for being very vocal during the blockade escape scene and for his conversation with a young Anakin Skywalker about starship controls. A lot of his lines in the movie are simply stating things that all of the characters are obviously aware of, landing him the name Captain Obvious among fans in old Star Wars forums.
There's the blockade. Shield generator's been hit. The shields are gone. Power's back.
This joke is carried on into LEGO Star Wars The Skywalker Saga, where many of his lines are similarly obvious.
Commander Rick Ollier has arrived. I can't do that. I've collected something.
He would go on to participate in the Battle of Naboo in space and attend Qui-Gon's funeral at the end of the film, but isn't really relevant beyond that point in any material, at least in Legends. In the current canon, which, spoilers again for the 2020 Darth Vader comic run, he would end up becoming one of the Amidalans, fighting to uncover the circumstances behind Padme's death, and would end up getting killed by Darth Vader himself.
I sense something. A presence I've not felt since...
Kami Marstrap. Kami Marstrap was a friend of Luke Skywalker's during their childhood on the desert planet of Tatooine, alongside others such as Biggs Darklighter, Wendy Starkiller, and her boyfriend, Lay's fixer Loni Osner. She was played by actress Koo Stark in A New Hope, who had originally auditioned for the role of Princess Leia and is better known outside of Star Wars for once having had a relationship with Prince Andrew of the British Monarchy. Yeesh. However, like Luke's other Tatooine friends, Kami was only included in scenes that were cut from the final version of the original film. However, she would eventually appear 44 years later in the Book of Boba Fett's second episode, The Tribes of Tatooine, where she was played by Mandy Kowalski. In the episode, Kami and her boyfriend Fixer would witness Boba Fett dispatch a group of Nikto gangsters at Tashi Station. Perhaps Kami's most interesting appearance in the Star Wars saga is from the novelization for The Last Jedi by Jason Fry, where she appears at the beginning of the book in a dream Luke Skywalker has, where he never left Tatooine to join the Rebel Alliance. In the dream, Luke is married to Kami in a timeline where the Empire reigns after R2-D2 and C-3PO were captured by the Empire before they could reach Princess Leia. Though Alderaan, Mon Cala, and Chandrila were destroyed, Tatooine enjoys Imperial peace, and Luke has inherited his family's moisture farm with his wife. Though Kami suspects that Luke wishes that somehow things were different and that he were somewhere else far, far away. R2-KT. R2-KT was a pink-colored R2 series astromech droid that served the Republic during the Clone Wars and the Resistance during the rise of the First Order. KT initially served alongside the 501st during the Battle of Ryloth and can be seen as part of the Resistance ground crew maintaining ships before and after the Battle of Starkiller Base. R2-KT was inspired by Katie Johnson, the daughter of Albin Johnson, who was the founder of the 501st Legion fan group that dresses in Star Wars costumes for charity efforts. When Katie was diagnosed with terminal brain cancer in 2004, she wished that she had a droid to watch over her, similar to how Padme was watched over by R2-D2 in Attack of the Clones. To make her wish come true, the R2-D2 Builders Club, another fan organization dedicated to robotics and R2-D2 reconstructions, assembled a fully functional pink droid for Katie, which kept her company during her final days. R2-KT would go on to visit many children's hospitals and Star Wars events, and merchandise featuring the droid has been used to raise money for charities. The droid's appearances in both The Clone Wars and The Force Awakens are tributes to Katie Johnson's memory. R2-KT is not to be confused with QT-KT, another pink astromech droid that was part of the D-Squad arc during The Clone Wars. QT was used as a stand-in for R2-KT for the D-Squad arc of the show, as the crew wanted to avoid the confusion of two different characters being named R2. Effent Mon. Effent Mon was a male Shevin who worked as Jabba the Hutt's head of security and can be briefly seen in the background of a couple of shots in Return of the Jedi. Considered handsome for his species, Mon worked at various points as a slaver, a mercenary, and a weapons smuggler for the Rebel Alliance. After Jabba saved Mon's life on the planet Glaka, Mon was considered one of Jabba's only true friends and faithfully handled the Hutt's estate while he was away on business. Effent Mon had a slightly expanded role in Return of the Jedi's novelization, written by James Caan, where he started a fight with the Gran Rhys on the sail barge, but this scene was cut from the final film. According to the Tales from Jabba's Palace short story collection, Effent Mon was slightly Force-sensitive and founded a Force-based religion on his homeworld after surviving the destruction of Jabba's sail barge. Known during production as the Elephant Man, Effent Mon's design originated from one of many concept maquettes, just like many of the residents of Jabba's palace, and the final puppet was operated by Andy Cunningham. The character's name likely refers to the fact that he appears like an elephant, kind of, but he bears a stronger resemblance to the Platybelodon, a prehistoric elephant relative, but could also be a reference to Joseph Merrick, a real man with severe bone and muscle deformities likely caused by Proteus syndrome, who was often known as the Elephant Man. Jek-14. First appearing in LEGO Star Wars The Yoda Chronicles, Jek-14 was a Force-sensitive experimental clone created by Count Dooku, originally intended to be part of a much larger Sith army. Featuring an enhanced cybernetic arm from which he could fire beams of Force energy, Jek-14 had an incredible talent in the Force, being able to execute rare Force abilities and feats of acrobatics. Despite his impressive abilities, Jek felt restrained by the impositions of both the Jedi and the Sith and didn't want to work for either, but would eventually come to help the Jedi and the Rebel Alliance at various points. After deciding to retire, he would visit his old friend Yoda to have his droid arm restored to a normal one. Appearing in another LEGO series, The Freemaker Adventures, Jek-14 would become a hermit on the junkyard planet of Zo, still possessing his cybernetic arm. He would appear to sacrifice his life to allow the Freemaker family to escape while holding off the Sith acolyte Nair. Jek-14 is a nostalgic character for many, as he showed up in the popular Yoda Chronicles series of LEGO specials and appeared in a couple of LEGO sets. Also, the idea of a Force-sensitive, cyborg, pacifist clone is just really cool and pretty unique, even if the character itself isn't canon. Or is he? You see, even though Jek appeared in both the Yoda Chronicles and the Freemaker Adventures, neither of those LEGO series are really canon at all, as the LEGO specials are meant to just be fun and not really be restricted by the timeline so that they can include funny and anachronistic elements. Although the executive producer for the Freemaker Adventures, Bob Roth, said in an interview with IGN that the LEGO Star Wars shows take place in their own unique universe that was essentially the true Star Wars continuity, reenacted by a kid playing with his own toys. The show's creators also consulted with the Lucasfilm Story Group so that the show wouldn't interfere with any major story beats from upcoming content, and the creators of the show have gone on to say that the show is canon adjacent, or could be canon. Regardless, the supposedly fully canon reference book, Star Wars Droidography, is written from the point of view of R0GR, a character that was originally from the Freemaker Adventures, and the book somewhat canonizes the very broad strokes of that show, including the presence of Jek-14. After all, if he has a Wikipedia article marked as canon, he has to be canon, right? Scuva Stev. Scuva Stev was a Sokavian who resided on the planet Kobo in 9BBY. He was a master fisherman and could be seen fishing around various spots of the planet where he would encounter the Jedi Cal Kestis and tell him about his life story. Having lived on his homeworld of Sokavi Tar during a fish famine, he joined an off-world fishing crew of the ship Grapnel to keep his people safe. Proving his skill with the harpoon and becoming second in command under the ship's captain, Wanyek Wet, Scuva would help defend his crew from sea creatures and rival crews alike. Eventually, however, Wanyek Wet would betray Scuva and jettison him into space. However, he was rescued by Purrgil and eventually made made his way back to Sakabi Tar to confront his old captain. After a vicious duel where Skuva was impaled through the chest, Skuva would use his immense fishing knowledge to imitate the mating call of the Glumbrig eel, and the eels would come to Skuva's rescue and cook Wanyek wet alive. After making his way to Kobo in search of better quarry and helping Cal Kestis stockpile in saloon with many types of exotic fish, he would leave Kobo to check on his people and ensure that Wanyek wet was truly dead. Skuva Stev was one of the many breakout stars of Star Wars Jedi Survivor, and his amazing tall tales told with a heavy Scottish accent have both entertained and bored many a player in search of completing the game's huge list of collectibles, as you have to collect all 10 of Skuva's fish and listen to all 10 of his stories to fully 100% the game. Rick the Door Technician. The game Star Wars Jedi Survivor is absolutely full of fantastic Glup Shittos, but until now, I haven't mentioned what might be the best one. Rick was an especially brave scout trooper stationed on the planet Kobo who stood in the way of Cal Kestis during the Jedi's quest to find the hidden world of Tanalorr. Despite his unrivaled loyalty to the Empire, commendable bravery in the face of such a formidable enemy, and his impressive skills in operating doors, Rick is really only one ordinary trooper in a game full of really difficult boss fights and combat sequences. I already brought up the Rancors, don't ask me how long it took me to beat Ravis for the first time on Master difficulty with only 3 stims. In an interview with IGN, the game's lead encounter designer Jonathan Wright explained the process behind creating the boss fight with Rick. He explained that because the segment before encountering Rick was one of the most difficult parts of the game, which involved fighting waves and waves of Imperial enemies, they wanted a way to further increase the tension in the mind of the player before releasing it with a humorous element. Rick was designed to look like a difficult boss fight at the end of a long hallway with no checkpoint beforehand to stress out players even more than they already were, only to fall to one swing of a lightsaber. Although EA released an infographic of the game's stats around a month after the game's release that revealed 489 players had fallen to Rick. Jedi Survivor is a game full of really heavy moments, but is also punctuated with fantastic little moments like these, one of the many reasons it is easily one of the best Star Wars games ever made. Kybo Ren. Kybo Ren was a Jedi apprentice turned dark side warrior that lived during the age of the New Republic and First Order. The son of legendary rebellion fighters Han Solo and Leia Organa, grandson to Anakin Skywalker, and nephew to Jedi Luke Skywalker, Kybo Ren was destined to do great things in the galaxy. However, his destiny would be forever changed when... Wait, this isn't the biography for Kybo Ren. This is Kylo Ren. Wait, why are there 2 characters with so similar names?
How did this happen? We're smarter than this.
Kybo Ren, whose full name was Gur Kybo Ren Cha, was a Ropagu from Tarnunga and the leader of the Pirates of Tarnunga during the reign of the Galactic Empire. Created for the 1985 Droids animated TV show by Peter Sauter and voiced by Don Franks, he served as the main antagonist for the episodes The Pirates of Tarnunga and The Revenge of Kybo Ren. Kybo Ren doesn't seem to have much of a presence outside of these 2 episodes of the animated show, and in modern times is really only known for coincidentally sharing a name with the far more well-known Kylo Ren. There are a few pretty funny rants online about how Kybo Ren's name was supposedly copied and reused shamelessly by J.J. Abrams and is an indicator of how new Star Wars stuff just repurposes old Legends material and makes it worse, as if the old Droids cartoon was the pinnacle of Star Wars storytelling. Plus, repurposing names from older Star Wars material, such as rough drafts of the original films, is a time-honored tradition of Star Wars, as we've already seen in this video. Regardless, the connection between Kylo Ren and Kybo Ren is probably just a coincidence until proven otherwise. Xanatos. Everybody loves the duo of young Obi-Wan Kenobi and his master, Qui-Gon Jinn, and they're one of the most iconic master-apprentice pairs in the entire franchise. What a lot of fans might not know is that Qui-Gon actually had a former apprentice named Xanatos, who battled Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan in the Legends Young Reader series, Jedi Apprentice. Originating from the world of Telos IV, Xanatos was the son of the world's governor, Cryon, and returned to the world on a Jedi mission to unravel a murder mystery, where he would witness the death of his sister during the investigation. When it was revealed that Cryon had orchestrated the murders, Qui-Gon sent him plummeting into a pit of flames to defend another Jedi, which pushed Xanatos over the brink into the dark side. Xanatos would take over his homeworld and father a son named Granta Omega, eventually confronting his old master again on the planet Bandamir. Xanatos would manipulate another Jedi apprentice, Bruk Chun, into becoming his own apprentice and launch an assault on the Jedi Temple that was thwarted by Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan. Xanatos' reign of terror would end when the 2 Jedi confronted Xanatos back on his homeworld, where Xanatos Xanatos would fall backwards into a pool of acid rather than die or be brought to justice at the hands of the Jedi. Xanatos' fall to the dark side and death would haunt Qui-Gon for years, and his son would later try to avenge his father's death in the later Jedi Quest series. Xanatos has yet to appear or be mentioned in the current Star Wars canon, and despite the similar name, it does not appear to have any direct relation to Davi Xanatos of the Gargoyle series or the so-named Xanatos Gambit trope. Crimson Jack. Crimson Jack was a pirate gangster character from the original run of Marvel Star Wars comics, first appearing in its 7th issue, making him one of the first ever Star Wars characters to originate from outside the films. In cahoots with Jabba the Hutt, Crimson Jack would encounter Han Solo and Chewbacca right after the events of A New Hope, stealing the reward they received for rescuing Princess Leia and leaving them unable to pay back Jabba the Hutt. Han and Leia managed to deceive Jack into thinking there was a rebel treasury in the Drexel system, where Han managed to kill Jack and escape with Leia. Though Crimson Jack's arc as a primary antagonist was pretty short-lived, his legacy would end up being key to resolving a certain continuity error once The Empire Strikes Back was released. In the 28th issue of Marvel Star Wars, released in 1979, Han Solo removed the bounty on his head by saving Jabba's life, but in 1980, Episode 5 revealed that the bounty was still active. So in issue 37, they revealed that Crimson Jack and his ship had been sponsored by Jabba, leading Jabba to resume his grudge and bounty against Han once he discovered that Han was responsible. Crimson Jack would receive virtually no other appearances or mentions until 2022 with the release of Halcyon Legacy, a comic series that served as a tie-in to the now-defunct Star Wars Galactic Star Cruiser Hotel. In the comic, which takes place in the era of the sequel films, he appears exactly as he had in the original comics, this time working for the First Order to try and snuff out resistance spies on the Halcyon. X1 and X2. If you thought the story of Jek 14, a Force-sensitive clone who struggled with his allegiance to either the Jedi or Sith, was strange or intriguing, you haven't seen anything yet. There's another story about Force-sensitive clones from the fairly little-known Battlefront Elite Squadron game that is perhaps even weirder and actually canonical to the Legends continuity. So, spoilers ahead for a 15-year-old PSP game. Elite Squadron follows the story of two Jedi clones named X1 and X2 who were made from the genetic material of Jedi Fallon Gray and fought many battles in the Clone Wars. I wonder what Palpatine was having so much trouble with in his Force-sensitive clone experiments if the Kaminoans had already made two perfectly good Jedi clones, but anyway. X1 and X2 would end up killing their Jedi Master on Cato Nemoidia during Order 66, and though X2 would come to regret his actions, X1 would not. After serving the Empire for some time as stormtroopers, X2 would have a full change of heart when the brothers were sent to Dantooine to kill civilians who were harboring a fugitive Jedi. X2 would side with the Jedi, who ended up being his own clone dad, Fallon Gray. X1 would kill Gray though, after which X2 would live on Dantooine for 15 years as a farmer. Eventually though, he would join the Rebel Alliance and face off against his brother during several crucial battles, training under Luke Skywalker through the end of the Galactic Civil War. After the death of Palpatine, X2 would help liberate Bespin from the Empire with Lando Calrissian. X1 would proclaim himself a Sith Lord after seemingly aging 50 years and would try to rebuild the Empire, so X2 tracked him to Mustafar, where his evil brother had captured Luke Skywalker to create an army of evil Force-sensitive clones. The final mission of the game is a lightsaber duel against X1, and though X2 would refuse to kill him, X1 would die trying to force throw his own saber at his brother. There are some differences in the PSP and Nintendo DS versions of the game's story mode, but those are the broad strokes of what is essentially the entire single-player campaign of Star Wars Battlefront Elite Squadron, which only takes about 2 hours to complete. The story for the game was originally envisioned as part of a proper console follow-up to the original Battlefronts 1 and 2, beginning development around 2006, but was cancelled around 2008 after a troubled production and repurposed into the title we know today as Elite Squadron. Arden Lyn. Arden Lyn was a master of the ancient martial art Teräs Käsi who appeared as an original character in the 1997 fighting game Star Wars Masters of Teräs Käsi. The game doesn't have much of a story beyond the concept of good guys fighting bad guys, with Arden Lyn on the side of the Empire, but the game establishes her as a mysterious young woman with a connection to the ancient martial art. Teräs Käsi actually translates to steel hand in Finnish, which is likely the inspiration for her metal arm. Abel G. Pena would eventually expand on the lore of the character though, taking the vague parts of her backstory and establishing her as having lived 25,000 years in the past. This new backstory established her as a follower of Palawa, a Force user user who could fall into a deep force trance that allowed deep sleep without aging. Lin would fall in love with a fallen Jedi named Zendor and join him to form the Legions of Letau, an obscure precursor to the Sith whose name has origins in some of the earliest Star Wars drafts. After Zendor was killed by Jedi Master Aldrista Pina, Lin would attempt to avenge her lover using a talisman to focus her rage into a powerful blast that killed the Jedi, but not before the Jedi used a technique to stop Lin's heart, so Lin used her force trance to sleep for 25,000 years. And this is still probably one of the less convoluted Star Wars backstories, all things considered. Eventually, her body would be found by the Empire, where she would be defeated at the hands of Imperial Inquisitors, but her life was spared by the Emperor so she could use her martial arts skills against the rebellion. After serving the Emperor for several years with the goal of eventually turning on him, Palpatine would eventually kill Lin in 10 ABY around the time of the Dark Empire comics. Arden Lin's expanded backstory is kind of strange because, despite her appearing as an original character in a Star Wars video game, the rest of her life story was only really elaborated on in reference material such as guidebooks and obscure supplemental RPG articles. Masters of Terrascasi was never really widely considered a good game, so it makes sense she never really got featured in a comic or novel or something, but this will be far from the last obscure character in this Iceberg that Abel G. Pena worked hard to establish expanded lore for. The martial art of Terrascasi, however, would become referenced many more times across Star Wars, as it's one of the martial arts that the Praetorian Guards use in The Last Jedi, and we also see Kira as a very proficient user of the martial art in Solo: A Star Wars Story and some of the more recent Marvel comics. Lugubrious Moat. Episode 8, The Last Jedi, made a big point to point out how much Luke Skywalker was romanticized and deified in the galaxy following his legendary adventures fighting the Empire, and this sentiment was carried on in The Legends of Luke Skywalker, a short story collection by Ken Liu, released 2 months before the film as part of the Journey to Star Wars: The Last Jedi publishing initiative. These stories are framed around a group of kids on their way to Canto Bight who are telling stories about Luke Skywalker and debating whether or not he's a myth. One of these stories is about a creature called a mole flea named Lugubrious Moat, who allegedly was responsible for Luke's success surviving the clutches of Jabba the Hutt. Originally living on the scalp of Salacious B. Crumb and telling him when to laugh in order to share his table scraps, Lugubrious would become inspired by Luke Skywalker's holo message and would advise his sister Leia on their escape by living on her scalp. Believing Skywalker to be overconfident and rash, but with his heart in the right place, Lugubrious would follow Luke into the Rancor pit, whispering to him how to defeat the Rancor, almost controlling him Ratatouille style by biting into his scalp, with Luke believing her voice to be that of the Force or the spirit of a Jedi. After helping the rebels escape the Sarlacc pit, Lugubrious told Leia never to mention her to her brother, saying that though she had given Luke smarts, Luke had given Lugubrious hope. After that, she joined the circus, hoping that Luke had learned to think for himself instead of trusting the voices in his head. Similarly to many stories found in the From a Certain Point of View short story collections, the ultimate canonicity of Lugubrious Moat's story is probably up to the interpretation of the reader, and though some might be pretty tired of Star Wars' habit of constant recontextualization of certain important plot elements, I think the idea that Luke owes everything to a certain mole flea to be pretty funny. Gormanda. Gormanda was a famous 4-star, 4-armed chef known for her instructional cooking videos. 3-time winner of the Orto Culinary Academy Award for Engorgeable Excellence, Gormanda's educational cooking material advised eaters across the galaxy how to prepare food that cared for both one's taste buds and their pocketbooks. For example, she gave a recipe for glow blue noodles that was affordable and could be made without meat due to the rarity of fresh ingredients during the Clone Wars. Gormanda originates from the infamous Star Wars Holiday Special, where she's featured in a roughly 4-minute sequence where Chewbacca's wife Mala watches one of her videos.
Stir, whip, stir, wah! Having fun, alright? Coming along nicely now. Step 3.
Honestly, this is still one of the least bizarre things to come out of the holiday special. Though her presence in the wider consciousness of the Star Wars fandom mostly stops there, her legacy would continue on in newer canon material. In the short story A Recipe for Death, a chef from Maz's castle on Takodana named Cookie Tugs was inspired to become a culinary artist after discovering ancient holovids of Gormanda. Considering that this story already takes place around 146 BBY, one must assume that Gormanda must belong to a long long-lived species like Yoda's if she's still making videos by the time of the Clone Wars and the Empire. Her legendary glow blue noodles can also be seen eaten out of takeout cartons in Andor and were featured in the official Black Spire Outpost cookbook. Honestly, the fact that blue noodles from an obscure online HoloNet article, canonically written by a character from the holiday special, appearing in Andor is just awesome. Gormanda was played in her one and only on-screen appearance by actor Harvey Korman, though the additional arms were provided by Mickey Morton due to the difficulty of the casting department of finding a four-armed actor. It has been said that Korman's performance as Gormanda was intended to be a parody of Julia Child, a famous chef and TV personality from the time. Though most elements of the holiday special, including Gormanda, were widely hated around the time of the holiday special's release, many cite Gormanda as one of their favorite parts of the show and a reason for the special's enduring legacy, for better or worse. Carib Dis. Carib Dis was a bounty hunter of indeterminate species that can be seen at the Spice Runner's den on the planet Kijimi in The Rise of Skywalker. Dis's species had a bizarre arrangement of sensory organs, with the organs that he used to see, hear, and smell located on the roof of his mouth, causing him to have to grimace in order to see. This frightened most other humanoids, so Dis had a custom sensor dome made to be worn atop his head to gather data on his surroundings. According to the novelization for The Rise of Skywalker, Carib Dis escaped Kijimi with other bounty hunters and smugglers before it was destroyed by the Final Order. Outside of an appearance in LEGO Star Wars The Skywalker Saga as a playable character, Carib Dis doesn't really have any other appearances or mentions, which I really hope changes sometime in the near future. Maybe he'll show up in some post-Episode 9 content, or maybe they can make more characters, perhaps a Jedi, of his species. It's also possible that Carib Dis's design and name are based off of the Charybdis, a toothy mythological sea creature from Greek mythology. Mosep Benid. First appearing in the background of certain Tatooine scenes in A New Hope, a character of the later named Nimbanel species was variously referred to as Walrus, Ming, or Mingo during the film's production, not to be confused with Ponda Baba, who is commonly referred to as Walrus Man. The character would end up appearing in the Marvel Star Wars comic series, presenting himself as Jabba the Hutt with one T. This was before Jabba the Hutt had properly appeared visually in any Star Wars media, and before anybody had even really defined what a Hutt was, so for a while, this was just what Jabba was known to look like, until 1983. This, of course, presented a continuity error. Official sources waffled for a while on whether or not the events of the comic happened the way that they were shown in the comic, showing a Jabba the Hutt that was not fat or worm-like, but eventually this would be fixed by, say it with me now, Abel G. Pena. Pena would go on to claim in old Star Wars message boards that an official retcon to solve the discrepancy would be done at some point, but it wasn't until 2012, with the release of John Jackson Miller's novel Kenobi, that it was suggested that the Nimbanel character from A New Hope, the then named Mosep Benid, worked for Jabba and sometimes used his name to represent his interests, and Benid's appearance in the original comic was confirmed in an article Miller wrote for Star Wars Insider 149. Strangely enough, at some point there was some additional continuity confusion regarding Mosep Benid, particularly regarding another Nimbanel named Tawas Ka, as two different Nimbanel individuals appear in A New Hope. Eventually it was decided that Benid was the one with white hair, and Ka was the one with red hair. Mosep Benid also has not been left out of the new canon. John Jackson Miller wrote the character into The Ride, a story for the Canto Bight novella collection where Benid works as the accountant for the Whippamorn gangster Sturg Ganna. Constable Zuvio. Zuvio was a Cuso Fordo. Commander Fordo was an elite ARC trooper who served in the Clone Wars. He would serve alongside General Kenobi at the Battle of Munilinst and be remembered as a leader of the... Okay. I'm sorry. That joke was bad. Let's just go back. Zuvio was a Cuso who served as the constable of Nima Outpost on Jakku around 34 ABY. He acted as sort of the sheriff of Nima Outpost, serving justice alongside a small team of two deputies who were also his cousins. Zuvio got a considerable amount of attention and excitement before the release of The Force Awakens, when he was featured heavily in merchandise leading up to the film, including action figures, coloring books, you name it. Everyone was very excited to see how this lawman on a lawless world was going to shake up the galaxy and influence the story of its newest heroes, but when the film came out, the character was nowhere to be found, which left a lot of people really confused, considering just how hard he was pushed in the film's marketing. Essentially, the Constable Zuvio phenomenon can be chalked up to certain aspects of merchandising being determined before the film was fully edited together, meaning that minor characters like Zuvio easily had the potential to just be cut altogether from the film. Zuvio was apparently slated to appear in a scene where Rey got attacked by Unkar Plutt's thugs, but Zuvio would come to the rescue to break it up. This scene would manifests in the final film, with Rey fending off the thugs on her own and meeting Finn immediately after, with Zuvio nowhere in sight. Ultimately, I think this version of the scene flows better and works better for the final movie, and I can't really find any strong evidence that this alternate version of the scene with Zuvio was ever even filmed. In fact, J.J. Abrams said that Zuvio never even had one line of dialogue. Perhaps the biggest contribution that Zuvio made to the final cut of the film is that the quad jumper ship that gets blown up right in front of Finn and Rey before they choose to escape Jakku in the Millennium Falcon, that ship was owned by Zuvio, but it's not like they bring that up in the film or anything. Zuvio does appear in the final film, but in the background and for only about 4 or 5 frames, and some people thought Zuvio was the guy that gets killed by Kylo Ren in Rey's Force vision in the movie, but that's actually just some totally different guy. Zuvio would get some additional details about him revealed in the film's novelization and visual dictionary, and would get a short story titled High Noon on Jakku for the Tales from a Galaxy Far, Far Away Aliens collection. But outside of a couple of smaller appearances in comics and whatnot, there doesn't seem to be much on everybody's favorite, or second or third favorite, Cuzo. Fordo. Commander Fordo was an elite ARC trooper who served in the Clone Wars. He would serve alongside General Kenobi at the Battle of Munilinst as the leader of the elite Munilinst 10, face off against Grievous and rescue Jedi at the Battle of Hypori, and fight back against Separatists at the Battle of Coruscant. Fordo is often regarded by many fans as being one of the most badass clone troopers of all time, especially due to one scene of the Battle of Munilinst where he fights off multiple super battle droids all by himself. Being one of the most prominent clones in the very much beloved and over-the-top 2D Clone Wars series, it's not hard to see why he's so popular among prequel and Clone Wars fans. Interestingly, Fordo does still manage to have some weird continuity stuff going on, particularly regarding his rank. Sources differ on whether or not he's a commander or a captain, with Obi-Wan calling Fordo captain in the Clone Wars show, but being referred to elsewhere as a sergeant. This would be resolved in the 2008 Complete Star Wars Encyclopedia, where Fordo would be identified as a captain with an additional title of Task Force Commander for the Battle of Munilinst, and future sources and action figures of the character would use the captain title.
It's like something out of a dream, or I don't know. Maybe I'm just going crazy.
Bidlo Quirv. By this point in the video, it's probably not surprising that some of the most insignificant background characters possible have received extensive backstories and featured in multiple comics, books, and behind-the-scenes interviews, no matter how little screen time they had or how unimportant they may seem to the overall Star Wars story. Pod racer that gets 3 seconds of screen time and gets blown up, he's got a name, a backstory, and a wife and kids. Random alien that shows up in the Mos Eisley Cantina, you can bet your finest starship that they've inspired countless other characters of the same species and have a detailed death scene somewhere in a short story. But what if I told you that a skull, yes, the literal skeletal remains that Luke Skywalker throws at the door controls in Jabba's palace to kill the Rancor in Episode 6, that skull belongs to a character that has a canonical backstory in the Star Wars universe. Bidlo Quirv was a human smuggler from Corellia who worked for Jabba the Hutt on Tatooine. He eventually came to work for Jabba for many years, forming rivalries with Han Solo and Bib Fortuna. He would clash with Fortuna especially as they competed to become Jabba's new major domo after the original retired. One day, Quirv would discover a Rancor inside a crashed starship in the deserts of Tatooine, but needed Bib Fortuna's help to transport it to their boss's palace. Jabba offered both Quirv and Fortuna either the role of major domo or a greater honor. In his greed, Quirv would accept this honor, which ended up being the chance to be the first one eaten by Jabba's new Rancor. Quirv would get his revenge in a roundabout way when Luke Skywalker threw his skull at the Rancor pit's control panel, dropping the door on the Rancor's neck, killing it. Bidlo as a character wasn't actually originally intended to be synonymous with the skull from Return of the Jedi. He originated as his own character from the Star Wars RPG sourcebooks, and his death was revealed in a short story from Tales from Jabba's Palace, published in 1996. Even then, his skull wasn't revealed to be the same skull thrown by Luke until his appearance in the Star Wars customizable card game, which tied together all the details of his backstory. Atha Prime. Atha Prime was a master of genetics and the one who orchestrated the Clone Wars. Exiled long ago by Emperor Palpatine, the Emperor's death would allow Prime to return to the galaxy and do battle with the Rebel Alliance, allying himself with Grand Moff Tarkin, who had narrowly escaped his death on the first Death Star. If Atha Prime's backstory sounds unfamiliar and contradictory to anything that could be considered remotely canonical, your instincts are in the right place. Atha Prime isn't a character that's appeared in any official material, canon, or legends, and wasn't created for a film, book, comic, or game, but a toy line by Kenner called Power of the Force, or alternatively, Star Wars The Epic Continues. This new toy line was developed to renew interest in the Star Wars brand in 1984 as the franchise began to wind down after the release of Return of the Jedi. Kenner had seen previous success with Star Wars toys based on original designs not seen in the films, so they envisioned Atha Prime as an original villain with an army of clone warriors distinct from the stormtroopers of the films. The line also saw new designs for Luke and Han, as well as a slew of new vehicles, including Prime's personal starship, the Apex Invader, and his double-decker Star Destroyer, Annihilator. Kenner's ideas would be rejected by Lucasfilm, though, who didn't feel quite ready to create post-Return of the Jedi content until 1991 with the release of the Heir to the Empire novel and the Dark Empire comic series. As Star Wars evolved, it seemed to leave Atha Prime behind. Attack of the Clones would fully contextualize the Clone Wars with no mention of Atha Prime as its mastermind, and the Dark Empire comics featured Imperial Sentinels that looked nearly identical to Atha Prime, as they were based on the same scrapped concept art from Return of the Jedi. However, Abel G. Pena is a huge fan of the character and has made several attempts to work him into expanded universe canon. Pena's first few attempts to canonize the character in magazine articles failed, as the articles he wrote happened to be cut or go unreleased for one reason or another, but Pena would finally manage to get elements of Atha Prime consolidated into two characters: Shadow Spawn, the main villain of Luke Skywalker and the Shadows of Mindor by Matthew Stover, and the new character Zeta Magnus in Pena's own novella, Skywalkers. Zeta Magnus retained most of the original details of Atha Prime, including his design, his role as a genetics terrorist, his rule over the so-called Dark Worlds, and his involvement in the Clone Wars. Zonama Sako. We've had Star Wars characters that are bugs, slugs, angels, demons, parasites, deities, shrimp people, frog people, rock people, potato people. Basically anything you can imagine has some kind of sentient representation in the Star Wars universe. But what if I told you there was a character that was an entire planet? Zonama Sako, I'm just assuming that's how that's pronounced, was the name of a living planet that resided in the unknown regions. Zonama was the name of the planet as an astronomical object, while Sako referred to the organism itself. Born from a seed of Yuzan-Tar, another living planet, Zonama Sako was rumored to have been the source of the fastest ships in the galaxy, which led Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker to the planet on an adventure detailed in the 2003 Legends novel Rogue Planet, using its internal hyperdrive system to escape into the unknown regions after an attack from Will Huff Tarkin in 29 BBY. Zonama Sako would remain obscure until the Yuzong-Vong War. At the war's end, it would play an essential part in the peace treaties between the Vong and the Galactic Alliance, allowing the remaining Vong to call the sentient planet their new home. Although the Yuzon-Vong and their inconceivably destructive war on the galaxy, which featured heavily in the New Jedi Order series of Legends novels, haven't made their way into the current canon, Zonama Sako has been identified as existing in the unknown regions in some new canon reference materials, so Rey might have to watch out when building her new Jedi Order in the new movie, as it looks to be pretty close to Octo. Windy Starkiller. Windy Starkiller, whose full official name was supposedly Wyndham Marstrap, more on that later, was a friend of Luke Skywalker's during their childhood on Tatooine, where he accompanied Luke on various adventures and often hung out with him and his other friends at Tashi Station, which is where he can be seen in the background of a cut-deleted scene from A New Hope. Windy, along with a few other characters such as Cammy, Janek Sunber, and Lay's fixer Eloni Osner, occupy a very strange and transient place in Star Wars continuity. Despite being some of the first Star Wars characters ever conceived and being present during a formative time in Luke Skywalker's life, very little is really concretely known about these characters for sure. Other than Cammy and of course Biggs, Windy is perhaps the least obscure of this group of Luke's childhood friends, but has basically only appeared in various adaptations of A New Hope, comics with ambiguous continuity status, or obscure children's paperback books, as well as a cameo NPC appearance in the old MMO Star Wars Galaxies. Even in his one scene in A New Hope, which was cut from the final film, it's not really clear which one is Windy and which one is another character named Deke. Windy has also been extremely inconsistent in the way he is physically portrayed. Between his various appearances, his hair color changes from being blonde, dark brown, light brown, or even red, with the only consistency being that Windy seems to be a Caucasian male, and the male part isn't even consistent. In the 1996 children's book Luke's Fate, Windy is portrayed as a younger girl, girl, whereas the character isn't portrayed as a girl anywhere else. But hey, maybe this just confirms that there's been a trans character in Star Wars ever since the very first movie. Try telling that to somebody who says Star Wars has gone woke or whatever. Wendy's name is also strangely inconsistent. Different sources list the character's name as either Wendy or Wyndham, and while we can probably assume Wendy is just a nickname for Wyndham, Wendy's last name is weirdly up for debate. Depending on the book or comic you're reading, his surname is either Starkiller or Marstrap, which is strange because Marstrap is already the last name given to Cammy Marstrap, who has never been indicated to be related to Wendy, though Leland Chi of the Holocron Continuity Database has confirmed Wendy's last name to be Marstrap. More recent legend sources give Wendy the name of Starkiller more consistently, and in the current Disney canon, the character does not yet have a confirmed last name. With all of that being said, Wendy's name still has even more interesting trivia behind it. Wendy was the name of various versions of several characters throughout George Lucas's many early drafts for the first Star Wars, and George was known for tweaking and switching around names quite a bit during these early stages. At different points, Wendy was a brother of Biggs and Leia, or Luke Starkiller's younger brother, before becoming simply one of Luke's friends by the third draft. Eventually, the name Wendy would find its name into Mace Windu of the prequel trilogy, and Starkiller would be used for the protagonist of The Force Unleashed and for Starkiller Base of The Force Awakens. Juan Sandage Jr. Juan Sandage Jr. was the son of the famed Devlik pod racer Juan Sandage, who participated in the famous Boon to Eve pod race alongside Anakin Skywalker in The Phantom Menace. Though many would confuse the Junior Sandage with his father, he would set out to make a name for himself in the world of pod racing, obtaining records for best single lap and most knockouts in a single race for courses on Ryloth, Gamorre, and Tatooine. Juan Sandage Jr. appears in the video game Star Wars Racer Revenge for the PlayStation 2, where he's a playable pod racing character. Though you wouldn't know that he's Juan Sandage Jr. just by playing the game, the strategy guide for the game reveals that his father died in 29 BBY, and that the character in the game is in fact his son. One would think that this is probably such an obscure character's only appearance, but no, Juan Sandage Jr. also shows up in Connect Star Wars. Yes, that Connect Star Wars. Because the pod racing segment of the game takes place in the year 22 BBY, 7 years after the elder Sandage's death, one must assume that the character in Star Wars Connect is also Sandage Jr. Incredibly, there is also one other character in the Star Wars universe that shares the name of Sandage, who also comes from an unexpected place. Count Sandage was a character present in some of the earliest drafts of the original Star Wars, but instead of a creepy little alien, he's a human man. The character would not end up in revised versions of the draft, but like many unused names from the early drafts, Sandage would end up getting repurposed somewhere else, in this case for everyone's favorite little hairy green pod racer. Jodo Kast. Jodo Kast was a Rebel Alliance operative and bounty hunter who was best known for wearing armor that was almost identical to Boba Fett's. Not picky about who he worked for, Kast would take jobs from the Rebellion, the New Republic, and the Empire, as well as criminal syndicates such as the Black Sun. In order to get more higher paying jobs, Kast would go so far as to impersonate Boba Fett and use his name, which would lead to Fett eventually tracking him down and killing him on Nal Hutta. For one mission against the Black Sun, Grand Admiral Thrawn would disguise himself as Kast, which is a level of stacked impersonation I'm going to choose to call Kastception. As one might be able to guess, the fact that Jodo Kast is a Boba Fett impersonator originates from the fact that Jodo Kast essentially exists to smooth over some minor continuity issues, which if I had a nickel for every time a Star Wars character was created because they shared an identity with Boba Fett, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice. Jodo Kast originates from the Star Wars RPG adventure book titled Tatooine Manhunt, which features a piece of Ralph McQuarrie concept art on the cover that depicts the iconic lineup of bounty hunters from The Empire Strikes Back. The actual story within the book features characters that appear very similar to those bounty hunters and act essentially as their stand-ins so that players of the RPG could fight Boba Fett and the others without causing any continuity snarls. However, due to the extreme popularity of Boba Fett as a character, Kast would garner a following all his own and would continue to feature heavily in scenarios for Star Wars the role-playing game before eventually being killed off in a short story. He also appears in Masters of Terras Kasi as a secret playable character where he's just a reskin of Boba Fett with the exact same moveset. It's possible that Jodo Kast still exists in the Disney canon, as the bounty hunter who scarred the face of Dr. Cornelius Evazan has been indirectly mentioned in a canon reference book, whereas the Doctor's injuries were attributed to an encounter with Jodo Kast in legend stories. Rum Slag. Rum Slag was a bounty hunter of an indeterminate humanoid species who was an extra in the Tatooine scenes for The Phantom Menace. he can be seen wandering around the Mos Eisley spaceport, as well as cheering for Sebulba in the stands of the Boonta Eve pod race. Rum Slag was played by ILM digital effects artist Alex Lindsay, who believed he was picked to shoot a scene in the suit simply because he was the right size for the already made costume. The character's name comes from the Young Jedi line of collectible trading cards by Decipher Inc., specifically the Boonta Eve pod race expansion. Decipher employee Chuck Kallenbach revealed that the character's name comes from a character that Dan Bojanowski, another Decipher employee, had played in a Star Wars tabletop RPG campaign, and the character's catchphrase was said to be, "Just chill." This is about all the information that exists about Rum Slag in or out of universe, and outside of a couple of possible comic appearances, including one where it's implied that he was killed at some point, Slag has only appeared in The Phantom Menace. Despite having a fantastic design and an appearance in a main saga film, this is one Glup Shitto that doesn't really have an extensive in-universe background. If nothing else, Rum Slag is one in a long line of Glup Shittos that have representation in action figures despite being about as minor of a character you can be in the Star Wars universe. Greb Leaps. The Senate chambers of the Star Wars prequels haven't always been known for their sheer entertainment value, but like the Mos Eisley Cantina scene in A New Hope, the Senate scenes have introduced several iconic species to the Star Wars universe. One of these species is the Asogians, who are represented by Senator Greb Leaps in the Senate in The Phantom Menace. Greb Leaps is actually backwards for Spielberg, which probably won't be surprising considering the Asogians are modeled after E.T., the creature from Spielberg's own feature film of the same name. Spielberg was indirectly involved with the production of the original 6 Star Wars films in various ways and is a close friend and colleague of George Lucas. For example, Spielberg was the one who introduced John Williams to Lucas and still gets a small percentage of the profits from the first Star Wars film as part of a bet that they had made a long time ago. As such, Lucas included a nod to Spielberg in The Phantom Menace with the appearance of the Asogian senators, and likewise, Spielberg had included a scene in E.T. where E.T. appears to recognize a child wearing a Yoda mask as someone he's familiar with. Although these scenes were obviously intended as playful Easter eggs, this hasn't stopped people from making fan theories to try and connect E.T.'s species to the galaxy far, far away, with some believing that E.T. and the Star Wars films take place in the same fictional universe. Greb Leaps himself hasn't been included in much expanded universe material, being briefly mentioned in the 2001 novel Cloak of Deception by James Luceno, in which the character was first named. However, Asogians as a species have had a few minor appearances elsewhere, such as in the Skywalker's novella and the original Marvel comic series, the latter of which their appearance was included via retcon. Boonta the Hutt. Anyone who's seen The Phantom Menace might remember that the big pod race is formerly known as the Boonta Eve pod race. As one could probably figure out from the name, Boonta Eve was a holiday in the galaxy, particularly one of 3 meant to celebrate the victories of the ancient Hutt Boonta against a warlord named Zim the Despot. Other than The Phantom Menace, we can see a celebration of Boonta Eve in The Mandalorian. The holiday was celebrated on Hutt-controlled worlds like Tatooine and was traditionally an opportunity for slaves to renew their vows of obedience to their Hutt masters in exchange for a day of feasts and gifts, though it may have turned into a more widespread secular holiday kind of like Christmas, celebrated on Tatooine even after the Hutts such as Jabba lost control of the major settlements. According to Hutt legend, the pod racing tradition comes from the practice of forcing prisoners from the Zim conflict to run for sport while the Hutts bet on the winner. Boonta himself was said to have ascended to godhood after his victories over Zim, and the Hutt world Kovari was renamed Boonta in his honor. Tan Skywalker. So back in the late 70s and early 80s, there was a line of black and white Star Wars comic strips written and drawn by Russ Manning, an artist perhaps more famous for his original series, Magnus Robot Fighter. In one of his Star Wars strips, which was published around 1979 and later titled The Constantia Affair, C-3PO converses with a rebel supercomputer named Mistress Nemos, who identifies Luke Skywalker as the son of Master and Mistress Tan Skywalker. Some of these older Star Wars comics have long been considered dubiously canon by many, and Mistress Nemos spouts a bunch of other gibberish like that Luke is a 10th degree human born in the sidereal era. However, many consider this a glaring continuity error after Return of the Jedi gave Luke's father's true name as Anakin Skywalker. Another instance of Tan being used was in the Prima Games official strategy guide for the 1994 TIE Fighter PC game, which inexplicably named one of its characters Tan Steel on the back flap, although the character's real name in the game and everywhere else in the guide was given as Merrick Steel. Abel G. Pena, who, as we know now, is a huge fan of resolving old and obscure continuity elements such as this, got the idea from lore advisor Pablo Hidalgo to implement Tan as a title given to exceptional starfighter aces. Pena also joked, though, that Tan was a fitting name for someone who grew up on the sun's baked world of Tatooine. Fake Wedge. Cole Tackbright was a Rebel pilot character who first appeared in A New Hope, sitting beside Luke Skywalker during the mission briefing before the Battle of Yavin. He's the one who very vocally doubts that proton torpedoes could be used to strike the Death Star's 2-meter exhaust port.
That's impossible, even for a computer.
It's not impossible. I used to bullseye womp rats in my T-16 back home. They're not much bigger than 2 meters.
Unfortunately for him, Tackbright would be grounded during the battle itself due to the Rebellion's starfighter shortages and his pessimism, which had to be rough considering Luke got a spot and hadn't flown an X-Wing once. Colin Higgins, who plays Tackbright, was initially cast for the part of Wedge Antilles, and from a certain point of view, is Wedge Antilles, as for all intents and purposes, this character was originally meant to be the same as the Wedge that flies into battle later in the film. However, during filming, Higgins was far more accustomed to television productions and was expected more time to rehearse his lines, so he struggled during the briefing room scene and was fired from the film after one day to be replaced by Dennis Lawson. Weirdly enough, the performances of both Higgins and Lawson were dubbed over by another actor named David Ankrum, as an American accent was wanted for the character, though Lawson would voice Wedge himself with an American accent in episodes 5 and 6. Fans noticed this discrepancy though, and eventually took to calling Higgins' character in the scene Fake Wedge for years. That is until 40 years later, the short story collection From a Certain Point of View was released, giving a canonical explanation for the appearances of the two Wedges. In the story Duty Roster by Jason Fry, Fake Wedge is his own separate character named Cole Tackbright, who is, in universe, confused for Wedge Antilles often and is referred to as Fake Wedge by his own fellow pilots for this reason. In the story, Tackbright is said to have a short temper, which led to him being grounded for several missions, making his absence from the final battle even funnier. After the Battle of Yavin though, he would gain a better appreciation for his fellow pilots' talents and learn to celebrate the achievements of others, congratulating the real Wedge on his heroic efforts. Jek 15. Earlier in the video, I regaled you the epic tale of Jek 14, the legendary Sith clone who escaped a fate of servitude to the dark side to forge his own destiny. Unfortunately, some of his brethren weren't as lucky. When Count Dooku unveiled the Clone-O-Matic 1138 device as part of the plan to create an army of Sith clones, they used a Jek 14 as the template for the next clones. The cloning process was flawed, however, creating a diminutive clone named Jek 15. Jek 15 could release energy beams just like its counterpart, but they could only be used to tickle Jedi instead of disintegrating them. Though Jek 15's whereabouts after his defeat on Geonosis are unknown, Dooku would later improve his Sith cloning process, creating an army of proper Jek 14 clones. Jek 14 would defeat them all with an energy blast that reduced them all to the size of Jek 15, evaporating the tiny clones without mercy or offering them the chance to turn to the light as he had. Kedpin Shoklop. Kedpin Shoklop was a one-eyed wormhole who won a 2-week all-expenses-paid trip to Canto Bight in 34 ABY for being awarded Evaporator Sales Being of the Year in only his 102nd year in the trade. Having worked for over a century with no vacation trying to become a Sales Being of the Year, Shoklop eventually deduced that those who won were higher management or otherwise favored by the higher-ups in his company. So, in 34 ABY, he decided to hack the selection process to ensure that he won, and though everybody was shocked, management didn't want to do anything about it to make sure nobody knew that the contest was rigged. Though Shoklop was excited to enjoy the casino resort, hoping to enjoy a zero-G massage and experience a fathier race, he would fall victim to the corrupt nature of the city, getting scammed into having his luggage stolen and was framed for spice smuggling by a Cascadag named Angalang, eventually getting arrested by the Canto Bight police. Angalang actually tried to kill one of the officers by slipping a detonator into Shoklop's drink, but Angalang eventually came to break him out, and when they were cornered by a gang, they fended them off together, after which the two enjoyed Shoklop's vacation together before going their separate ways. Kedpin Shoklop was originally created for The Last Jedi, where he was portrayed by none other than Warwick Davis, but only appeared in scenes that were cut from the final film that took place at Zord's spa and bathhouse. His backstory largely comes from the Canto Bight novella collection, specifically the story titled Rules of the Game by Saladin Ahmed. The Light Man. During the Rebel Alliance's attempted rescue of Han Solo in 4 ABY, an unidentified glowing alien helped guide C-3PO to Jabba's throne room. If you do not remember a light-emitting alien in Jabba's palace in Episode 6 guiding C-3PO to Jabba's throne room, that's probably because he did not end up making it into the final film. Portrayed by stuntman Peter Diamond on set, the Light Man only appears in rare behind-the-scenes material as a dark-suited figure with several glowing light bulbs attached. The original idea for the Light Man was that he would be a a Lava Man, whose final visual effects would have been added in post. Sources are pretty scant for additional information on this Light Man or Lava Man character, but Phil Tippett confirmed in a tweet that scenes with him were never even shot. It's possible we'll never know the true reason that Light Man didn't make it into Return of the Jedi, but I guess it's always possible that he could show up one day in his own comic book or Disney Plus series. Mustafar Man. Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi's climactic duel at the end of Revenge of the Sith is one of the most visually impressive and emotional moments of the entire saga. The duel was painfully poured over at every stage of production to ensure that it was impactful as possible. For example, during the concept art stage, there was a proposed fight scene where Obi-Wan and Anakin cooperatively fought a Mustafar monster, but this was removed to keep the duel as personal as possible. As such, the climactic battle takes place with the two former brothers-in-arms dueling alone. Or are they? In March of 2024, a user on the Star Wars subreddit Discord server spotted the ghostly image of a man's face just behind Anakin at 1 hour, 59 minutes, and 3 seconds. Though the appearance of this man is probably just a minor behind-the-scenes visual or stunt slip-up, given how much modern canon materials such as Vader Immortal and the Darth Vader comics characterize Mustafar as a vergence in the dark side with ties to the afterlife, perhaps we'll find out one day that in canon, the Mustafar man was actually the spirit of an ancient Sith Lord or dark side entity witnessing one of the most important events in galactic history. Maul's descendant. Over a century after the time of Darth Maul, a descendant or possible clone of Maul was active in the galaxy, taking Darth Talon on as his apprentice and using the inside of an asteroid as his base of operations. This supposed successor to Darth Maul would do battle with individuals such as Darth Enexor and the Jedi Gareth Lorca. This supposed Darth Maul clone, heir, great-grandson character was a planned but never fully realized protagonist for the game Battle of the Sith Lords by Red Fly Studio. The game began development in 2010 and was always going to be focused on Darth Maul in some way, with the original story focusing on Maul's childhood and training under Sidious, and the first gameplay prototype featuring Darth Maul fighting the Death Watch and clone troopers during the Clone Wars era. Later, during a meeting with George Lucas, Lucas told the team to use Darth Talon in the game, a character that lived over 170 years after Darth Maul's death, so the idea of the main character being a clone or descendant of Maul moved forward. The story solidified around the era of the Legacy comics, with Maul and Talon fighting Darth Krayt and other Sith Lords with new designs. Unfortunately, development would end just after the prototyping phase in 2011, with Disney's acquisition of Lucasfilm potentially being a major factor. Though as late as 2015, the team was working on a next-gen demo with Maul elements to try and re-pitch the game. Dan Borth, former head of Red Fly, said that Lucasfilm was not interested in this demo, especially after EA's new exclusive license for making Star Wars games. Dan Borth, in a Reddit AMA, gave a lot more details about the game's development and what this new Maul character would have been like. The game might have shown the grueling training process of becoming a Sith, or Maul's spiritual struggles with seeing how the Sith changed over 100 years, either losing his faith or becoming sort of a fundamentalist of the rule of two. Though Battle of the Sith Lords would have undoubtedly featured heaps of interesting new ideas and taken at least one version of Maul into wild new directions, sadly, like many other games in development around the time of the Disney acquisition, Battle of the Sith Lords likely won't ever see the light of day. Though we have gotten some incredible Star Wars games under Disney and EA, with more coming in the future. Arhul Hextrophon. Arhul Hextrophon was a historian and archaeologist that was present for the medal ceremony at the end of A New Hope, standing directly behind and to the left of Leia Organa and providing her with the legendary Medals of Bravery. Hextrophon would join the Rebel Alliance at its creation in 2 BBY after having been rescued from Zygerian slavers alongside his family by Han Solo and Chewbacca, and served as archivist for the Rebels' fight against the Empire. Hextrophon was first described in the Star Wars sourcebook for the Star Wars role-playing game in 1987, which was the first ever Star Wars RPG sourcebook published. Hextrophon acted as the book's narrator, giving a thorough yet slightly biased in-universe description of the elements inside, giving game masters a lot of information for their campaigns, but also allowing them the freedom to adjust that information for their own campaigns if need be. The character wasn't originally identified as the man standing behind Leia during the medal ceremony until a 2012 article written by Leland Chee for the 133rd issue of Star Wars Insider. Though his inclusion in A New Hope was ultimately pretty much a retcon, the actor who played Hextrophon, Nick Joseph, has embraced his place in the Star Wars mythos as the obscure character. Another character named Vorin Naal, who was also retconned to be the same as an Episode 4 background character, served a similar purpose for other Star Wars RPG and reference books. Though Hextropfon's legacy in universe is one of honor and bravery in service to the rebellion in the field of journalism, What if I told you that Hextrafon's greatest adventure is one that has been largely lost to time and is little known among both in-universe historians and even the most dedicated of Star Wars readers? According to the text Supernatural Encounters, the Trial and Transformation of Arhul Hextrafon, Hextrafon underwent an expedition between 36 and 40 ABY to uncover the origins of the Star Wars galaxy. What he discovered was arcane knowledge behind anyone's comprehension that had been lost for eons. From tales of the Maker, known as the Father of Lights, who created the galaxy and the Force as a manifestation of his love, the Bedlam Spirits, a family of renegade Force demons who spread humanity across the Earth worlds and oversaw the mind-boggling Empyrean wars from their hidden dimension of Eleutherion, to the Celestials, who seeded the galaxy's planets from their countless engineered sapient races, and the ancient deities of the Sith, who inspired the first Dark Empires and inspired shadowy legacies for millennia to come. According to these lost volumes, Hextrafon revealed it all, tying together the genesis of the Star Wars universe with that of E.T., Battlestar Galactica, Brave Star, and more. If the ultimate journey of Arhul Hextrafon sounds either extremely interesting or absolutely bonkers, and you're wondering how all of that fits into any official Star Wars continuity, then this is where the fun begins. Though everything else I've told you about Arhul Hextrafon is officially licensed canon under Lucasfilm in either the Legends Expanded Universe or the newer Disney canon, the book Supernatural Encounters has quite the history with the very nature of Star Wars canon itself. The long short of it is that Supernatural Encounters was written by a man named Joe Bongiorno, who had written articles for the West End Games Star Wars RPG in the late 90s. Bongiorno began work on two new articles, Cult Encounters of the Star Wars Universe and Supernatural Encounters of the Star Wars Universe, around 2000, and after the cancellation of the Star Wars Gamer magazine where they were supposed to be published, Bongiorno would continue to add to his articles until they grew to the size of novellas. Though sources differ on the precise chain of events, both Cult and Supernatural Encounters were nearly published online multiple times between 2008 and 2015, but were turned down supposedly due to their concept and length. Bongiorno would continue to post updates involving versions of his writings on his own website once it became clear Lucasfilm didn't want to publish any new material within the Legends continuity. The official licensing and tax paperwork had been done to publish the stories, and despite them never being officially published or fully recognized by Lucasfilm, Bongiorno maintains that his work was never technically cancelled or unlicensed, as all the necessary licensing paperwork had also been filed for his work. In 2024, Bongiorno published the finished version of both Cult Encounters and Supernatural Encounters on his website, and had them up for sale for a brief time on Amazon as 3 paperback volumes. I was lucky enough to learn about the project and get my own copies back in February, but it seems that now, as of May 2024, the Amazon listings are down and it doesn't look like they'll be available again. The PDF version, however, is still available on Bongiorno's website, so you can read it all in full. Many hardline EU fans online, such as some other creators on YouTube, believe that Bongiorno's work is canonical to the Legends continuity and should be regarded widely as such, but other fan-run efforts and continuity databases, such as Wikipedia, do not recognize lore from Supernatural Encounters. Regardless of whether or not one considers Supernatural Encounters to be canonical or not, Bongiorno's work is certainly impressive, and these are some thick books. It's been described by some as the Silmarillion of Star Wars, a comparison that I find fits pretty well. As I'd mentioned before, Supernatural Encounters goes over Bongiorno's interpretation of the creation mythos of the Star Wars universe, tying together a lot of disparate pieces of super deep-cut lore from the comics and books, and even including connections to other sci-fi franchises. He provides some explanations for why the Star Wars galaxy is the way that it is, and even alludes to a kind of multiversal time travel solution to the issue of Star Wars having two main parallel continuities, which is something that I don't think Disney or Lucasfilm are ever really going to address in an in-universe way. I don't really want to spoil too many of the details of Supernatural Encounters here in case you guys might want to check it out, and I haven't even fully finished it at the time of the recording, so you will have to uncover the ultimate fate of Arhul Hextrafon yourself, if you dare. And that is the end of episode 2 of the Weird Star Wars Characters, or Glup Shitto, Iceberg. I hope it eroded your sanity as much as it did mine. I have done nothing but think about Star Wars and listen to the sound of my own voice for the last 2 weeks. I just wanted to note real quick, if you found any of the characters or topics I talked about in this video interesting, I have a list of all the sources I used in a document I'll link in the description. Most people when they make Iceberg videos never really cite their sources, so I wanted to change that. A lot of the online and sources I used ended up being Wikipedia. I tried to find other people online talking about, you know, Effant Mon. I really did my best to look for other sources as well where I could, even if I ran into a lot of dead links and defunct forum threads. Like Wikipedia is good mostly as a starting point, even if it is insanely comprehensive. I did try to cross-reference the information there with all of the print and media sources that it had listed, but I don't own literally every novel or reference book in existence quite yet, so I could only go so far in some places. Anyway, in the document for each character, I also have a list of key print sources and media appearances for both myself and you guys to reference in the future, because let's be honest, Star Wars isn't really all about Wikipedia articles, summaries, and lore videos on YouTube. Star Wars is best when you're experiencing it yourself instead of having it spoon-fed to you by somebody online, so maybe this video might inspire you to take a peek yourself into the deeper world of Star Wars books, comics, games, etc. I've been reading at least a couple Star Wars books a month for the past year and a half or so, and I still didn't know a whole lot of the information on this iceberg until I started doing the research. In the meantime though, if you want more Star Wars stuff from me, I have a second channel where I am now putting all of my reviews on all of the Star Wars Legends stuff that I'm reading, all in chronological order because I'm insane, so check that out if you want to see me talk about Star Wars comics for the next 10 years. I'm a huge fan of both canon and Legends continuities. We're currently gearing up to read Knights of the Old Republic comics over there pretty soon, and I'm super excited about it. Also, I know I said in the last Glup Shittos video that I was on my Sigma grind set and I was going to make a bunch more videos, and that was well 8 months ago, so just ignore me when I say I'm going to do anything in a timely manner. I said this one was going to be out before the end of May, and well, look where we are now. But I'm out of school now, and we'll see what happens and whether or not I'm going to get a real job at some point, or if I'll make a living talking about slugs and frogs from Star Wars forever. The next iceberg is going to be a massive Pokemon one, so stick around if that sounds like something that you're interested in, or if you have any other ideas for icebergs I should cover that haven't been done anywhere else. Whether you go check me out on my other channel, stick around for the next iceberg, or follow me on any of my socials, I hope you have a good one, and well, until next time, may the Force be with you.